man is back.
Oh, okay, boys. Oh my gosh, the man got that stuff. This is a 5 out of freaking 5.
It is beat making time.
Next week is E3 week. My album comes out next week.
I have the leopard.
This is your boy.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the YouTube citizens, y'all know who this is. This is your boy Dash, the True Inferno. Back at it with another Pokemon Unite commentary video gameplay for you guys. And if you're watching this, by the time I upload this video, which is hopefully on a Wednesday or maybe even Thursday of this week, I would be in Florida for a wedding and a hangout with friends and things of that nature. But I still got videos for you guys, so I have a video for this week. And I'm going to have a video for next week, even though next week I will be on my way back home next week, Wednesday. So we'll see what happens if I upload that or not, whatever the case may be, while I'm in Florida or wherever. But nevertheless, we got some news to talk about. So this is something that I've been preaching about on this channel for a while now. Well, there's a lot of things that I preach about on this channel, but this is one of the ones that I've been preaching about, and that is the fact that the NCAA needs to stop with this amateurism excuse in terms of why athletes cannot get paid, why they couldn't make money off of their own like lists and things of that nature. Well, my preaching and complaining is actually paying off now. Because, ladies and gentlemen, let me give you an article, the DukeChronicle.com, titled, Breaking Down the House versus NCAA Settlement and the Possible Future of Revenue Sharing in College Athletes. Now, before I get into that, I just want to announce that, yes, NCAA college football is coming back as a video game this year. In July, I'm getting that mug, by the way, because I was like a big fan of that video game. I love that video game. When I was playing it, you know, when it came out within the last, I played like the last 2 or 3 versions of that game before they like shut it down for years. But now they bringing it back. And in fact, it's going to be bundled with Madden. So there's going to be a Madden college football bundle this year. So if you want to get that, there you go. But me, I'm just going to stick with college football because I prefer that over Madden. Now, let's get on to the, and you know, players would be more than likely, I'm assuming, that players will be played, or players who are in the game, rather, will be paid for being in the game. So, let's get on with this. The college sports world was taken by storm Wednesday evening as the NCAA and the power conferences, which were into the ACC, the SEC, the Big Ten, Big 12, and Pac-12, you know, I'm Big Ten, you know, that's me, voted to approve a settlement for 3 antitrust lawsuits, most notably House versus NCAA. Now, it says Wednesday, but this article was posted on Monday. So I'm assuming they meant last week, Wednesday. So let's move on. This is a monumental move that will change the college athletic atmosphere as universities and conferences are allowed to directly pay players through revenue sharing for the first time in history. If the settlement is approved, the era of amateur athletes will be essentially over. And here's a quote. The 5 autonomy conferences and the NCAA agreed the settlement terms is an important step in the continuing reform of college sports that will provide benefits to student athletes and provide clarity in college athletics across all divisions for years to come, says NCAA President Charlie Baker and the Power 5 commissioners. There are 2 important components of this settlement. The first is the roughly $2.8 billion that all conferences in the NCAA will pay the current and former athletes from back to 2016 for the next 10 years. These athletes claim they lost potential NIL, name, image, and likeness, revenue. The second is a framework where conferences and colleges, I refuse to call them schools, colleges would directly pay student athletes. There are 2 different ways for college athletes to make money, NIL and revenue sharing, and this article is a more in-depth explanation of the difference. So there you go with that, but I'm not going to get into the article. This case deals with revenue sharing, which is money generated from conferences and university athletic department budgets. The settlement has been a work in progress for multiple years now, so we're breaking down the legal claims involved in the case and what the result could be for Duke and the rest of the okay, I understand this is Duke Chronicles, but I don't know why they got to mention Duke like that, but whatever. The legal claims. This settlement, we've resolved 3 separate antitrust cases. House versus NCAA, Hubbard versus NCAA, and Carter versus NCAA, all from athletes claiming the NCAA violates antitrust laws. Former Duke football captain Dwayne Carter is the namesake plaintiff in the latter case, joined by a Stanford soccer player, Nia Harrison, and TCU/Oregon basketball player, Sedona Prince. There have been myriad, I'm assuming I pronounced that word correctly, antitrust cases against the NCAA, and most claims are similar in nature. Here's the gist. In 2020, former Arizona State swimmer Grant House and Prince sued the NCAA for borrowing NIL payments from athletes prior to 2021, when the NCAA changed its rules to allow NIL, by the way. House versus NCAA also raises complaints for a post-NIL world, specifically concerning the lack of TV broadcast revenue gained by players. The plaintiffs, House and Prince, says the conferences work together with the NCAA to exploit student athletic labor and effort without legal representation, and also limit the compensation athletes can receive. In addition, they claim the NCAA's restrictions on NIL and control of TV markets prevent athletes from profiting on their true market value, which is more than scholarships and education funding. And here's a quote here. These landmark settlements will bring college sports into the 21st century, which college athletes finally were able to receive a fair share of the billions of dollars of revenue that they generate for their colleges. He said schools, but I'm going to say colleges. Says Steve Berman, an attorney for the plaintiffs. The NCAA and power conferences, the defendants in this case, likely decided to settle because if they lost the case, the association would have to pay a lot more, maybe up to $20 billion and sooner. Additionally, all of the constraints on NIL would be gone, further decreasing the NCAA's scope of influence. Here's what the NCAA gets in return for selling. Athletes who opt into the future revenue sharing agreement won't be able to sue the NCAA, which gives it some protection. However, Congress has not granted federal antitrust protection to the NCAA, something that is likely not coming anytime soon in an election year. Now let's dig into the details of the two big parts of the settlement. Back pay to former athletes. I'm kind of interested about this one. The first agreement is back pay, or payment for work done in the past. This $2.8 billion payment to be made over the course of 10 years is geared to the current and former athletes as far back as 2016 that lost out on possible profits from the NIL landscape post-2021. The NCAA will use its reserve fund set aside from its profits to pay roughly 40% of the $2.8 billion. The other 60% comes from conferences, but in a unique method. Out of this 60%, power conference colleges, the NCAA, again, we already know what they are, will take on 40%, and the rest is shouldered by non-power conference colleges. The group of 5 conferences, think of teams like App State and East Carolina, and even non-FBS schools, those who don't compete for the college football playoff, including NC Central and Campbell, pay a fraction. For Duke, which is a power conference college, the payment is about $1 or $2 million total for the next decade. Interestingly, the conferences will pay players by taking a chunk out of their future revenue from the March Madness tournament. The NCAA pays conferences based on how many games its teams play in the tournament, roughly $2 million for every game. Wow. And conferences will use part of these futures, and I'm quoting here, NCAA tournament participation payments, end quote, to fund the athletes' payments. So even though football is the highest revenue generated sport in the NCAA because of TV viewership and ticket sales, basketball helps support the settlement because the NCAA earns large sums of its annual tournament in March. However, this structure could end 100 small conferences more, especially one big leagues that rely on this guaranteed $2 million payment for revenue. They will also be forced to pay I'm gonna butcher this word. Disproportionate, butcher that word, but whatever, amount of the settlement to mostly former Power 5 athletes. And here's a quote here. It feels like the NCAA is bailing out the biggest spenders, and conferences like ours are paying for the majority of the settlement, says Robert Harris, the Ivy League executive director. Sports economists will determine how the $2.8 billion will be split among the 10,000 former and current athletes affected by the settlement. But students revealed that 90% of this $2.8 billion? I'm assuming they put to say billion, but they made a typo say million. But let's move on. We'll go to Power 5's men's basketball and football players, so these smaller conferences are justified in their concerns. And then you got the women's basketball, because they got a March Madness. You got baseball, softball, you got golf, you got tennis. I'm like, so what about all of that? Which is another thing I have a question about, but let's move on. The reason the back pay goes to 2016, and this is another reason why I'm kind of curious about this, is due to the statute of limitations, the limit on how far back certain legal claims can be addressed. For the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, there is a statute of 4 years from the date of the most recent injury. Injury? Yeah, it says injury. I think that's the type of, I guess, whatever, I don't know. Hence the 2016-2017 season cutoff, which was 4 years prior to the NCAA, allowing name, image, and likeness compensation. Future revenue sharing structure. We almost done with, well, we getting there. The second and perhaps most important thing this settlement does is create a future framework for colleges and conferences to directly share their revenue with athletes. The current proposal creates a spending cap of roughly no more than $22 million annually for each university, similar to salary caps used by professional leagues starting in the 2025-2026 season. This figure represents 22% of, and I'm quoting here, average media rights, ticket sales, and sponsorship revenue of each Power Conference college, end quote. Basically, the average Power Conference college generates about a $100 million annual revenue stream, 22% of that being $22 million, obviously. This figure could increase as revenue does. And each school, or each college rather, could decide how much they want to use to pay student athletes as long as it doesn't exceed that cap. The agreement makes TV deals that networks pay the conferences, for example, the ACC's deal with ESPN and the CW, even more important because colleges can use conference TV revenue to pay athletes. So more fruitful TV deals equals less money they have to cut from their other expenses. Clemson and Florida are currently suing the NCAA, Duke's conference, arguing that they aren't able to maximize their value and compete in this environment. For example, the new Big Ten media contract could give its colleges $75 million annually, with the ACC's average deal generating roughly $44 million per college. That's crazy. It's important to note that revenue sharing to athletes is all in addition to NIL deals. The sponsorships players negotiate with booster collectors or companies to make appearances in commercials and at charity events. Those can still continue, but an April ruling allowed colleges to directly facilitate NIL deals, meaning universities can be an intermediary between athletes and collectives, which is interesting. NIL allows the bigger booster programs to maintain an average because with revenue sharing, every Power Conference college is paying athletes the same roughly $22 million amount. However, those with big collectors can make up the difference by offering lucrative NIL deals. Athletes in each incoming class will be able to opt in or opt out to the future revenue sharing agreements. But why would athletes opt out on an opportunity for money? Here's a quote. If players opt out, they will give up any money they will receive from the damages, but retain the rights to sue the NCAA and its colleges in the future for antitrust violations. And that was a quote from ESPN college football reporter Pete Thamel, who that's what they said. This means players could be getting more money as a result of other ongoing antitrust cases like Fontenot versus NCAA out of Colorado, so they might be incentivized to opt out and retain the rights to sue the NCAA. So what's left to decide? Well, a lot. First of all, the settlement has to be approved and reviewed by Judge Claudia Wilkin of the U.S. District Court of Northern California, along with the plaintiff's attorneys. This could take months, but it's likely to be approved. There are still a lot of questions on how the future revenue stream will be distributed amongst players. Duke has 27 varsity sports, and eventually, not all of them generate the same amount of money for the athletic department. So how would that be taken into account? Good question. The answer is that payment allocation will probably be left up to the college. College football is the biggest money maker, because of its lucrative TV deals. And even at a college like Duke, where basketball culture is prominent, which is true, the football team earns the highest revenue for the Blue Devil athletic department, which is interesting. Because Duke is mostly known as a basketball college, but yet their moneymaker is the football team. So that is interesting. Colleges could have trouble funding lower revenue sports, which are now more vulnerable. The new revenue sharing system also has Title IX uncertainties. Title IX is a federal law that says, and I'm quoting here, schools or colleges must provide male and female student athletes with equal treatment and benefit, end quote. According to The Athletic, college administrators believe the annual revenue sharing total dollar amount will likely need to be equal between men's and women's teams, but individual athletes and teams do not have to make the same amount. Also, NIL deals will still favor the highest revenue generating athletes. And here's another quote. I expect the athletes who are generating the most money will get the greatest economic returns, says, end quote right here, says Jeffrey Kelzer, a plaintiff lawyer in a House case, to the New York Times. Continuing with the quote, that's the economic competitive market we live in, end quote. This element also eliminates sponsorship limitations for all sports because decreasing restriction gives the NCAA antitrust protection, Schools or colleges can decide how many sponsorship players they want per team as long as it is within a roster limit. Say a college gets a lot of revenue from baseball. They might decide to increase the scholarship allocation from the current 11.7 to 15 or even 20 players. Most scholarship payments will be made on top of the new revenue sharing requirements, further hurting many athletic departments. But as the deals are finalized, or details, some scholarships expenses from universities could count for the $22 million or billion dollar figure as well. Finally, I'm thinking it's $22 million because I think each college would be paying their students a grand total of $22 million. Now that I think about it. Finally, the settlement doesn't address employment, including the pending Dartmouth union case. Some think the future of college sports is collectively bargaining whether student athletes are part of a union or not. While the settlement creates more questions than answers, this is truly a significant weekend for the future relationship between the NCAA and the athletes. So we're getting there. We're taking a huge step here. It is something that I have been asking for a while now, and that is for student athletes to get paid, or to be more specific, they use their name, their image, and their likeness to make their own money. And because here's the problem that I have with all of this. Well, unless the NCAA and these conferences are balling with money, and that's more so the case with the Power 5 conferences rather than a conference that is not part of Power 5. Unless they're balling with money, how in the world are you going to pay all these athletes? Because you got to pay them all. You can't just pay the college football players, even though they're all making the most amount of money. Let's be real. Out of all these college sports, it's college football that's making the most amount of money, followed by college basketball. Then men's, that is. Then it's college basketball for the women. And after that, I have no idea what it is. It could be baseball, it could be softball. There's golf, there's hockey. You know, you get, it might be hockey because they got the Frozen Fours. It might be hockey after the March Madness fiasco. So how you going to pay all of that? How you going to pay all of them? So that's why I'm like, I'm not sure how realistic it is unless they're balling with money. Every single college is balling with money. I'm not sure how realistic it is to pay all these college student athletes while maintaining payment towards the employees who work at these colleges. It's just like too much money that have to be spread around. So that's why I was like, yo, let these students go out and make their own money. Like, what's wrong with them getting a TV deal? What's wrong with them getting a clothing line deal? What's wrong with them getting a deal with Nike? And yet they want to bring up this amateurism. I'm like, nobody's give a damn about amateurism. Like, who's watching college sports just to say, oh, I like the amateurism of it? I'm like, nobody says that. Like, first of all, like, I'll be honest. If it wasn't for, like, issues like this, I wouldn't even know what amateurism was. I didn't know that was a thing. If it wasn't, like, a few years ago when I heard about stuff like this. So, the bottom line is this. The amateurism thing is an excuse. It's basically bullshit. And I'm glad that it's being, like, put to rest. Like, 'cause it needs to. It needs to be put to rest because, again, it's bullshit and that needs to stop. So, but again, the question is, like, now they talk about paying former athletes as well. So, like, I know they talk about $2.8 billion, and that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for one person. That's a lot of money for 5 people. That's a lot of money for 100 people. But we talking about millions of people who played and are currently playing. Now, yes, there's TV deals, there's revenue deals, and then, of course, they can sell the tickets, so more money is coming in. But it's still a lot of people to pay. So that's why I'm like, how are they going to pull this off? And that's what I said, let them make their own money. Like, go out, get a commercial deal, whatever. So I'm glad that eventually these student athletes are getting paid, and especially those who are not playing anymore that moved on to, like, professionals, leagues, or they just graduated and got real jobs, whatever. I'm just concerned. I just have questions regarding how are they going to pay all these students? You can't just limit it to just football and basketball. You got to pay them all. Like if they bring you some type of revenue, you got to pay them all. So, and then the one thing I saw in there is like every team within each college will receive the same amount. So the college football players will receive the same amount as the golf team. Is that what I read correctly? Which to me also make no sense. Like there's some league teams that have to get more than others. Like college football generates the most money. If it generates the most money for your college, you have to pay them the most. And then it could be the men's college basketball, then the women's, whatever, the case like that. It should be like that instead of saying, oh, every single team within every single sport at our university is going to get the same amount of money to spread out, which is what, 1 million, 2 million, something like that. And I'm like, but they all don't bring in the same amount of revenue. So I have issue with that. But they did also say, well, like, depending on who the player is, some players within that team will receive more money than others. Like the quarterback will receive more than the kicker and things of that nature. So that something like that makes sense. So this is going to be interesting. This is going to be very, very interesting. And obviously this is still in court. So we need to see how things would go from here. But this is a step in the right direction. But there's just still so many questions that need to be answered. And I'm going to call it a wrap. So with all that said, y'all know who this is. This is boy New J Gatsby, a.k.a. New Stephen A. Smith, saying peace out, y'all. And I'll see y'all next time. Yeah.